The great hall of Erinmore had never looked more like a trap. Soraya did not know that yet. She stood in the outer courtyard with frost on her cloak and joy in her chest, looking up at the blaze of light pouring through the hall's high windows, and thought it was beautiful. Thought it was a sign. Thought the warmth of it was the world itself leaning forward to meet her. She had ridden 3 days through bitter wind and half-frozen roads to get here, carrying a secret so precious she had not dared to breathe it aloud. Not to the innkeeper who had pitied her reddened cheeks, not to the stable boy who had watered her horse without being asked, not to a single living soul, because the secret belonged to one person alone. She had come to give it to him in person. 6 months of something that had no proper name among wolfkind had led to this. The man who had found her in the border village of Calwick on a diplomatic pass and stopped his entire convoy to ask about the symbols above the healer's door. The man who had come back the following month and the month after that, each time with fewer guards and more honesty. The man who had told her, quietly and without performance, that he had never once in his life done something without reason. She had believed him. She believed him still. The courtyard guards knew her face. One of them stepped aside without a word as she approached the inner gate, and she noticed the brief glance he exchanged with his partner, something unreadable and quick, and filed it away beneath the excitement and forgot it. She should not have forgotten it. The inner corridor was empty, every soul drawn toward the great hall by the same current. She heard it before she reached the doors. The rhythmic striking of a ceremonial staff against ancient stone, deliberate and slow, marking time for something that could not be hurried. She knew that sound. Every wolf in the realm knew it. The striking of the elder's staff meant the accord was open. It meant a declaration was being made before the assembled packs. It meant someone was being chosen. Her hand found the wall beside her. The great hall doors were not fully closed. A finger's width of warm light bled through the gap, carrying with it the held breath of hundreds of wolves who had gone absolutely silent for what was about to happen. Soraya pressed her eye to the gap and looked through. The hall was packed to the walls, pack leaders and noble houses and warriors standing in blocks of rank and color, every face oriented toward the raised dais where the high elder stood in white robes, his staff in his hand, his silver head bowed in formal witness. And there, on the dais, stood Varen. The sight of him landed in her chest the way it always did, with that particular weight and that specific ache of recognition. Dressed in ceremonial charcoal and gold, dark hair pushed back from his face, the quiet authority that made every wolf in any room unconsciously orient toward him. He looked ready. He looked certain. 4 women stood before him in white, ascending the dais steps with the composed precision of people who had been rehearsing this moment for years. Daughters of powerful bloodlines, each one carrying the weight of a house's ambition in the set of her shoulders. Soraya did not recognize 3 of them. The 4th she knew by reputation. Copper hair that the torchlight loved, eyes the color of deep amber, warm and calculating in equal measure. The daughter of House Morthane, the family that controlled 2/3 of Erinmore's southern trade routes, and had been angling for this position since before Varen took the crown. Maris of House Morthane. She watched Varen's face for the formal distance a king wore in public, the careful neutrality she had seen him use when the role demanded more than the man. It was not there. He was looking at Maris with something open and warm, an expression that belonged to private rooms and quiet mornings, not public ceremony, the expression of a man who saw what he wanted and felt no particular need to conceal it. He was not performing. He was not suppressing. He smiled, that particular, unguarded, deeply familiar smile that Soraya had believed existed only for her, crossed his face like a key, turning in a lock she had not known was there. "The accord stands open," the High Elder announced, his voice filling every corner of the room. "The realm waits upon your will, my king." Varen stepped forward. "Maris of House Morthane." His voice was warm and clear and utterly without hesitation. My choice is made. The hall erupted. The sound hit Soraya like something physical. Hundreds of voices breaking open at once, howls of approval threading through the cheers, the stamping of feet on ancient stone. She watched Varen lift Maris's hand toward the assembled crowd. Watched Maris receive the gesture with composed triumph, the dignity of a woman who had never seriously considered any other outcome. And in that same instant, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Soraya's body told her the truth it had been trying to tell her for 3 weeks. The exhaustion she had blamed on the journey, the mornings that had started wrong before she was fully awake. The small, private adjustments her body had been making that she had noticed and dismissed, and noticed again and refused to examine. Until now. Until this exact moment, when examining them was the cruelest thing the world could have done to her. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. She was carrying his child. She was standing in a doorway with the most important news of her life pressed beneath her palm, watching him declare another woman his mate before the assembled packs of Manor, and not one soul in that hall knew she existed. Except one. An older woman stood in the shadow of the western corridor entrance, iron-gray hair pinned back with quiet precision, a face that had spent decades learning to reveal only what it chose to reveal. Her eyes had found Soraya's face through the gap in the door and had not moved from it. They looked at each other. The woman's expression held no cruelty and no triumph. Only a sorrow so settled it had become part of her features, as though she had been carrying it long enough that it no longer felt like weight. She did not speak, did not move, did not raise her hand. She looked at Soraya with that ancient, quiet grief, and looked away. Soraya pushed off the wall and walked back through the empty corridor. She did not run. She walked with one hand pressed to her stomach and her eyes on the middle distance, back through the inner gate, across the frost-covered courtyard, up the servants' staircase to the small chamber on the eastern corridor. She had brought very little. Packing took less time than she expected. At the window she paused. Celebration fires were already breaking out across the capital, orange and gold spreading through the winter dark like something contagious. Somewhere in that hall, Varen was receiving congratulations from every house in the realm. Maris was being addressed as the future queen of Manor for the first time. Soraya touched 2 fingers to the cold glass. She had practiced so many words. She left without any of them. The servants' gate was unguarded. She passed through it and walked into the dark with her cloak pulled close, and her hand curved over the secret that no one in the world knew she was carrying. She did not hear the howl that tore open the eastern sky nearly an hour later. Raw and sudden and wrong in pitch, the sound of something vast that had just understood what it had lost. She was already past the city walls by then, already becoming someone else. Nearly 3 months later, the village of Kalwick had almost entirely forgotten that Soraya had ever left, which suited her perfectly. She had come back as someone else. Mira, she told people now. A woman from the northern lowlands, recently widowed, carrying her first child into a winter that had not been kind. The story had the advantage of being largely true. She had lost someone. She was carrying a child alone. The winter had been exactly as unforgiving as it looked. The village healer was old and grateful for the help, and asked no questions that mattered. Kalwick was small enough that skilled hands were worth more than a verifiable history, and Soraya had always had the gift. She set bones. She sat with the dying in the dark, and said quiet things until the breathing slowed and stopped. The villagers called her Mira and did not notice that the name sat slightly wrong on her, the way a coat belonging to someone else never quite settles at the shoulders. She did not let herself think about Varen. She renewed that decision every morning and failed to keep it every night, when the dark had nothing useful to offer and the child moved against her palms with a strength that still surprised her. The mark on her collarbone had not faded. This was the fact she returned to in the hours before dawn. Among wolf kind, rejection was supposed to leave nothing behind. A bond dissolved should dissolve completely, leaving smooth skin and the clean, final ache of something finished. Instead, it burned, low and constant, like an ember that refused to either ignite or die. It ached when the wind came from the east, and in the deepest hours of the night, she sometimes felt a faint pressure through it, something vast and searching pushing against the edges of her awareness, like a tide against a closed door. She knew what it felt like. She refused to let it mean anything. False hope was more dangerous than the cold, more dangerous than the loneliness, more dangerous than the fear that came every time the child moved, and she understood fully that she would be doing this alone. "You will be strong," she whispered to the dark. "You will be the strongest thing I have ever made." The child moved against her palm, slow and certain, and Soraya lay in the dark and breathed, and did not let herself think about who else should have been there to feel it. The news came on a Thursday, carried by a wool merchant from the lowlands who stopped at the healer's cottage for a hand salve and stayed half the morning because no one had asked him how his journey was in over a week. Soraya wrapped his palms in linen and listened. He had come through 4 major settlements on the lowland road, he said, and in every single one of them the talk was the same. The Alpha King of Erenmore was tearing his realm apart. "Mad," the merchant said, shaking his head with the comfortable authority of someone reporting on something that did not affect him personally. "That is the word people are using. Gone entirely mad. His own council cannot get near him. They say he has deployed his wolves to every settlement from the northern border to the coast, questioning travelers, searching properties, posting coin for information." Soraya kept her hands moving, kept her face still. "Searching for what?" she asked. "Someone." He shrugged. "A woman. No name that anyone knows. No description anyone can agree on. Only that the king will not stop, and that whatever she did to him, it must have been something monstrous to leave him in this state." Soraya set down the bandage roll. "The eastern trade routes have been disrupted for 2 months," the merchant continued. "Soldiers camped outside villages for weeks at a stretch, and the reward he has posted." He let out a slow whistle. 8,000 silver marks for information leading to her location. 8,000. "I have walked these roads for 20 years, and I have never heard of a private bounty that size." He left eventually, satisfied with his salve and his audience both. Soraya stood at her window for a long time after his cart had faded down the road. 8,000 silver marks, his wolves at every crossing in the realm. Nearly 3 months of searching that had apparently made him unrecognizable to his own council. She pressed her fingertips to the mark on her collarbone. It pulsed once under the pressure, warm and unmistakable. Why would a man unravel his kingdom searching for a woman he had chosen to leave behind? Why would he spend nearly 3 months destroying the peace of everything he had built, hunting someone he had publicly and ceremonially replaced? She knew the answer she was not supposed to trust, the answer that felt like hope, which made it dangerous. She pressed it down and moved away from the window. But it followed her through the rest of the day, patient and quiet, settling into the spaces between tasks the way smoke settles into fabric. Why was he searching? And what would she do when he found her? The letter was not addressed to her. That was what made it so much worse. She found it wedged beneath the cottage door on a morning when the frost had hardened the ground to iron, and the village was quiet enough that she could hear her own breath. A folded square of dark paper, sealed with black wax pressed into the shape of a stag's head. The crest of House Morthane. It had been meant for someone else. She understood that within the first line. The name at the top was not hers. It was a name she did not recognize, a name belonging to someone in Calwick who had apparently been watching and reporting back, written in the neat, precise hand of someone who considered this correspondence entirely routine. The body of the letter was 4 sentences long. She has been confirmed in Calwick. The asset should not move against her directly. Remain in position. The extraction team will arrive within 3 days of this letter's receipt to ensure the matter is handled cleanly. Soraya read it twice. Then she set it on the table and stood very still for a long moment, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat. Extraction team. She turned the phrase over with the careful detachment of someone examining a wound they cannot yet afford to feel. She had wondered how long it would take them to find her. Nearly 3 months hiding under a borrowed name in the village where she had grown up, where half the people knew her face from childhood. In hindsight, it was not remarkable that they had found her. What was remarkable was that she had believed, even briefly, that they would not. She pressed her hand to the mark on her collarbone. It burned with low, steady heat, the way it had every morning since she left Arranmore. Movement at the tree line caught her attention. She went still. A shape between the ancient oaks, dark-furred, 4-legged. Absolutely motionless, watching the cottage with an intelligence that had nothing to do with ordinary animals. Another shape emerged beside the first, then a third, further along the tree line, taking a position that cut off the path to the village. These were not Varen's wolves. She had seen his pack before, silver-gray and deliberate, moving with the quiet confidence of animals that served a king. These were different, darker in color, tighter in formation, coordinated with the cold patience of something that had been trained specifically for this. They had not come to watch. They had come to wait. The knock came at dawn. Not from the front of the cottage. From the rear door, the one that opened onto the narrow path behind the herb garden, the one that almost no one in the village knew existed. 3 slow knocks, then 2 fast. A pattern. Soraya stood in the center of the room with the iron fire poker in her hand, her heart loud in the silence, and did not move. 3 slow, 2 fast. She had heard that sequence exactly once before. In Arranmore's castle, on a night when Varen had sent someone to her chamber because he could not come himself. Someone he trusted absolutely. The only man in the kingdom whose loyalty he had never needed to question. She crossed the room and opened the door. The man on the threshold was broad and gray-haired, dressed in the plain traveling clothes of a merchant with none of the markers of his actual rank. His face was weathered and tired in the way of someone who had not slept properly in months. And his eyes, a deep, steady amber, collapsed toward relief the moment he saw her face. "My lady," he said quietly, "I had almost stopped believing I would find you." She did not lower the poker. "You should not have come here, Orvin." "No." He glanced at the tree line without appearing to look at it. "But neither should they. We have very little time." She let him in. He moved through the cottage with the practiced efficiency of someone assessing a room for threats before allowing himself to settle. He sat at her table and placed both hands flat on the surface, palms down, the gesture of someone choosing transparency over everything else. "I have to tell you something," he said. "I need you to hear all of it before you speak." She sat across from him with the poker still in her lap. "Then speak." The night of the accord, 3 days before the ceremony, someone gained access to the king's private wine stores. We do not yet know who inside the castle assisted them, though we have suspicions. What we know is what was placed in the wine. A compound derived from silver root, and 2 other plants our healers have spent weeks trying to identify. Together they suppress the wolf entirely. Soraya heard the words, set them carefully against everything she had believed for nearly 3 months. "Suppress how?" she asked. "Completely, not dulled, erased. Every instinct severed, every bond and recognition and pull of the wolf silenced as if it had never existed." Orvin's voice was measured, but his jaw was tight. He stood on that dais with no access to anything beneath the surface, no awareness of what the bond was telling him, no memory of what he had promised you. He was entirely present in the ceremony and entirely absent from himself. The fire in the hearth crackled. Outside, the village was beginning to wake, ordinary sounds drifting through the walls. "He came around 2 days later," Orvin continued, "in his own chambers, with no memory of the ceremony at all. The first coherent thing he said was your name. He was at your chamber door before anyone could reach him, before we even understood what had happened to him. Soraya's hands tightened on the poker. Your chamber was empty. Your belongings were gone. Orvin paused. The king has not been the same person since. How did you find me? She asked, because she needed to understand before she could allow herself to believe anything else. The bond. He cannot locate you precisely across distance, but it has been guiding him. Every week he narrows the radius. He is close, my lady. Days away. Perhaps less. She looked at the folded letter still sitting on her table. Orvin followed her gaze. May I? He asked. She slid it toward him. He read it, and his expression went very still in the way that experienced men's faces go still when they are absorbing something they already half expected and had hoped not to confirm. The asset in Calwick. We suspected Morthane had placed informants in outlying villages once the search began. They have known you were here longer than this letter suggests. He set it down. The extraction team. We believe that to be a unit of 6, possibly 8, specialized for situations where direct confrontation is too visible. They do not come to negotiate. I know what they come for, Soraya said. Which is why I came to the rear door. Orvin rose from his chair. I have 2 of the King's Guard positioned in the village. If we move now, before the unit is fully in place, there is a route through the eastern corridor. The window shutter exploded inward. Not glass. The solid wooden shutter itself, punched off its frame by something that moved too fast to track. It struck the opposite wall and came down in splinters, and through the open gap came a sound Soraya had not heard before, but understood immediately. The low, coordinated signal call of wolves communicating positions to each other in the moments before a strike. The dark shapes at the tree line were no longer waiting. Orvin had his blade out before the echo of the shutter had finished. He moved to place himself between Soraya and the window without being asked, without hesitating, the way people do things they have decided long before the moment arrives. Stay close, he said. Whatever happens, stay close to me. The front door came off its hinges. 3 came through the door, and 2 through the broken window, hitting the room from both directions in the practiced formation of people who had done this before, and had no intention of giving their targets time to think. Orvin met the first wolf with his blade and bought them both 3 seconds. The cottage was too small for a fight of this scale. Furniture shattered. The herb bundles Soraya had spent 3 days drying came down from the ceiling beams in cascades. She pressed herself against the back wall with her hands raised and watched Orvin take a blow to his left side that she heard from across the room, the dense, specific sound of something breaking inside a body. He kept fighting. She had to give him that. He drove the wolf back through the doorway and held the threshold for nearly a full minute before the second one came at him from the side and took his legs out from under him. He went down hard. The wolves circled him. Patient and unhurried now that their work was mostly done, Soraya stopped breathing. Orvin was trying to rise, one arm not answering him properly, his blade still in the other hand, his face carrying the expression of a man calculating what his body could still offer against what the situation required. It was a calculation she recognized. She had made it herself twice in her life, and both times the answer had been the same. Not enough. She looked at the cellar door in the corner of the room, close enough to reach if she moved right now, before any wolf shifted attention from Orvin to her. She could be through it and pulling it shut in 4 seconds. Whatever happened in this room after that, she would not have to watch it. She looked at Orvin on the floor. He had ridden however far it was from Arranmore to find her. He had sat at her table with his hands open and given her the truth she had needed for nearly 3 months. He had positioned himself between her and the window the moment the attack began, without calculation, simply because she was standing behind him. She was not going into the cellar. Soraya pressed her palms together. The power rose, reluctantly at first, and then with sudden, uncomfortable force. As though it had been waiting behind a door she kept bolted and was no longer willing to remain patient about it. She had been given this ability at birth, and had spent her entire life concealing it. First from the village, then from the castle, then from everyone after her grandmother died, which meant from the whole world. It was a healing gift. She had always been clear with herself about that. Warm and precise, designed for mending broken things, not for breaking things that were whole. She had never tested where it ended. The golden light bloomed between her palms, quiet and profoundly out of place in the middle of a destroyed cottage surrounded by wolves who had been paid to make sure she did not survive the morning. Every wolf in the room turned to look at her. The hesitation lasted one full breath. Training arguing with instinct, the way it always does when something does not match the briefing. And then the nearest wolf gathered itself to move. Soraya crossed the room and knelt beside Orvin and pressed her hands against his side. The light poured into the broken places in his body as it always did when she worked, finding damage the way water finds cracks, and she felt it as she always felt it when she worked. The specific geography of injury mapping against her awareness. 2 ribs fractured, 1 separated. Something deeper she did not have a name for, the kind of damage that happens when something hits too hard and too fast. She poured everything she had into it. Orvin made a sound she had only heard from people who had stopped expecting relief and then received it without warning. The wolf behind her lunged. The light flared. Not because she directed it. She did not know how to direct it as a defense, and had never once tried. But something deeper than her made a decision, the child inside her, or the bond still burning on her collarbone, or some part of herself she had never been introduced to, and the warmth that had been flowing outward reversed with a force that shocked her completely. The wolf struck the edge of the light and was thrown back the way a stone thrown into a river is thrown back when the current shifts suddenly. It hit the far wall, and did not immediately rise. The remaining wolves stopped. She could see the recalibration happening in each of them, the reassessment of what the situation actually contained. They had come for a pregnant woman in a village cottage. They had not come for this. 2 backed toward the broken doorway. The third held its ground, which she registered even as she was grateful it did not advance. Orvin rose beside her, breathing still ragged, but his eyes clear and present. His blade was in his hand. He said nothing, but his shoulder pressed against hers in the quiet, solid way of someone choosing to stand beside another person in a difficult place and meaning it. Then the ground shook. Not the cottage, the earth itself, shuddering once and then again under the impact of something very large moving very fast through the eastern tree line. The wolf that had held its ground spun toward the sound, and what Soraya saw in that animal then, in the sudden collapse of its entire posture toward the floor, was uncomplicated terror. The trees at the eastern edge of the property came down. Not broken, uprooted, cleared out of the path of something that had no interest in going around obstacles when going through them was faster. A wolf came through the gap where the trees had been. Black. The way deep water is black, with a size that did not feel possible until you were standing close enough to understand, not with your mind, but with the older part of you that still remembers what it meant to be small, exactly what the difference in scale meant for everything else in the clearing. Its eyes blazed gold. It stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked at Soraya, and everything else, the remaining wolves, the wreckage of the door, the cold morning air itself, became the background. Soraya stood in the ruins of her hiding place with her palms still faintly glowing and looked back at the wolf that had torn a path through a forest to reach her. "Varen," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The shift happened between one breath and the next. One moment the enormous black wolf stood at the edge of the clearing with its eyes blazing and the ruined tree line behind it. The next, a man knelt in the frost where it had been, his head bowed, his hands pressed flat against the frozen ground as if the earth were the only thing holding him in place. Soraya did not move toward him. She waited. He rose slowly, not with the fluid authority she remembered from the castle, that particular ease of movement that had always made him seem like he occupied more space than his body actually required. He got to his feet the way someone does who has been running for a very long time and is only now permitting himself to stop. He looked terrible. That was the first thing she registered, and then immediately felt guilty for registering it, and then registered it again anyway, because it was undeniably true. The shadows beneath his eyes had the settled quality of months rather than nights. His face had a gauntness to it that the Varen she remembered had never had, a particular hollowness that comes from burning through yourself faster than rest can repair. His dark hair was longer than she had last seen it, pushed back from his face with the impatience of a man who had stopped caring about appearances somewhere around the second month of searching. He looked at her from across the clearing and did not speak. She realized, after a moment, that he was afraid to. "You look dreadful," she said. Something moved through his expression that might, under different circumstances, have become a laugh. "I have been told." "How long?" she asked. 2 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days since I woke up and found your chamber empty." He said it without inflection, the way you state a fact you have been counting so long that the counting has become its own kind of wound. Soraya pressed her hands together to keep them steady. Behind her, she was aware of Orvin standing quietly in the ruins of the cottage doorway, giving them distance without being asked. "I came to surprise you," she said. The words landed in the clearing with unexpected weight. Varen's jaw tightened. "What?" "The night of the accord. I was not hiding in the shadows waiting to see what you would do." The words were coming out now without her fully choosing them, 3 months of silence breaking open in the cold morning air. "I had ridden 3 days through the winter to reach you. I had packed nothing except good news and hope, and the words I had been practicing since I understood what was growing inside me." She placed one hand flat against her stomach. "I was going to walk through those doors and find you and tell you that we were going to have a child. That was supposed to be the best moment of my life." Varen made a sound that was not quite a word. "Instead, I watched you smile at her." Soraya's voice held steady with an effort she felt throughout her entire body. Not the formal expression. Not the performance of a king at a ceremony. The real one. The one I thought was mine. "Soraya. You looked like a man who had made his choice long before the ceremony and was simply glad the waiting was over." She stopped. Breathed. "I did not leave because I was hiding. I left because I had just watched the person I loved most in the world be genuinely happy about a future that had no room in it for me or for this child. And then I discovered I was carrying your child in the same moment." Silence. Varen crossed the clearing in 4 strides and stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she could see every detail of what the past months had done to his face. He did not reach for her. "What they put in my wine," he said, "took everything below the surface and locked it somewhere I could not access. The bond. The recognition. Every instinct my wolf had ever built around you." His voice was low and even, and it cost him something to keep it that way. "I stood on that dais and I felt nothing that I should have felt, and everything that I was being shaped to feel. I was present in that ceremony the way a man is present inside a dream, where the logic is wrong, but he cannot identify why. And when you woke?" "I woke to Maris in my chambers and no memory of how she came to be there." His eyes met hers and held them. The horror of that moment. Understanding what my body had agreed to while my mind was absent. Understanding that something had been done to me that I could not undo, and that you were already gone. He exhaled. "I have spent every day since trying to reach you through a bond that I could feel, but could not fully follow. And every night lying awake understanding that you were somewhere in this kingdom believing I had chosen to leave you behind." Soraya looked at him for a long moment. "The smile," she said quietly. "The one I saw. When you looked at Maris." "I do not know what it was," Varen said. "I know what it was not. It was not happiness. It was not recognition. It was not anything real." He paused. "I am sorry that you saw it. I am sorry that the last image you carried away from Erinmore was that." She had held the grief inside for so long that releasing it felt less like relief and more like damage. The way a dam breaking is not the same thing as the water being free. She pressed both hands to her face for a moment and breathed, and then lowered them. "The child," Varen said carefully. "Orvin told me when we found the village. Are you well?" "We are both well." She watched him receive the word both. Watched something move through his face that he did not attempt to conceal. He reached out slowly, and his hand stopped just short of her stomach. Asking. She placed her hand over his and pressed it flat. The baby moved. One long, unhurried roll, as if aware of the hand on the other side of the barrier and responding to it. Varen closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the calculation was gone from his face, and something much simpler had replaced it. "We have to move," Orvin said from the doorway, his voice careful but firm. "The extraction unit will have heard the approach. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they regroup. And my king." He paused. "There is news from the capital that will not keep." Varen straightened. His hand stayed against Soraya's stomach for one more moment before he lowered it. "Tell me," he said. Orvin told him. They rode through the remainder of the morning and into the afternoon, Soraya in front of Varen on his horse, his arm a steady weight around her waist, and the pale winter sky spreading overhead in shades of pewter and silver. She had protested getting on the horse. He had simply looked at her with the particular expression that she had always privately called his immovable face, and she had gotten on the horse. "My wolf needs you within reach," he said against her hair. "Nearly 3 months of the bond pulling in a direction I could not follow. I need you close for a while." She did not argue with that. She leaned back against his chest and felt his heartbeat through the layers of their cloaks and let the rhythm of it settle something in her that had been unsteady since the night she left. "Tell me what it was like," she said, after a while. "The searching. All of it." He told her. He told her about waking to the smell of someone who was not her in the space that should have been empty, and the horror of understanding what 2 days of absence from himself had agreed to. About the moment he had run to her chamber and found nothing, not even the ghost of her, in the air. About the way his wolf had taken over entirely in those first hours, driving him through corridors and out into the city before his advisors could stop him, running on pure instinct toward a bond he could feel but not locate. He told her about the weeks that had followed, the search radiating outward in rings from Aaron Moore. The sleepless nights with maps spread across the war table, trying to reason through what he knew of her and where she would go, and what name she would use. The slowly narrowing radius as the bond grew stronger, until he was close enough to feel the faint warmth of her through it. The specific quality of her presence that he had spent months learning to distinguish from the noise of everything else. "I felt it too," Soraya said quietly, "every night. A pressure against the mark, like something enormous pressing gently against a door." He went still behind her. "You felt that?" "I thought I was imagining it. I told myself I was imagining it. I was trying to reach you." His voice was rough. "My wolf, when I slept, it would push toward you through the bond. I did not know if it was landing anywhere. I did not know if you could feel it on your side." "I felt it," she said. "I just did not let myself believe it meant what it felt like it meant." They rode in silence for a while. The forest road was empty, the winter light thin and clean between the bare trees. Ahead, Orvin's horse moved at a steady pace, carrying its rider with the practiced ease of long campaigning. "I was going to tell you about the baby that night," Soraya said. "I had practiced the exact words. I had imagined your face. I had thought about it so many times that the imagined version of the conversation had started to feel like a memory." Varen's arm tightened around her waist. "I want to hear them," he said, "whenever you are ready. I want to hear the words you practiced." She tilted her head back to look at him. In the thin winter light, she could see the damage months had done, the shadows and the gauntness and the very particular grief of someone who had been carrying too much for too long without anywhere to put it down. She told him the words she had practiced. He listened to every one of them. When she finished, he pressed his lips to her hair, and the bond between them stirred with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold. She turned in the saddle and he met her halfway, and the kiss was not the tentative thing she had half expected from two people who had put each other through so much. It was immediate and certain, the way a held breath finally releases when the danger has passed. She felt his hands come up to frame her face, and felt the bond flare between them with a force that made her catch her breath against his mouth. When they separated, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. "There is something I have not said aloud," he told her. "I have thought it every day since I woke and found you gone. I have said it to an empty bond and to a sky that did not answer, and to the space in a bed that should not have been empty. I want to say it to your face." She waited. "I love you," Varen said. "I loved you before I had a name for it, and I loved you through every day of searching, and I will love you past the last breath of this body, and whatever comes after that." Soraya looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said softly. "I have always known. I just needed to remember that I knew." Ahead of them, the road crested a hill, and Aaronmore spread into view beneath the afternoon sky. Where the gold and charcoal standard of the royal house should have flown above the castle gates, something else moved in the winter wind. A black stag on a field of red, the banner of House Morthane. Varen's arm went rigid around her waist. Soraya had been expecting something. The news Orvin had delivered in the clearing had prepared her for the fact of it, if not the particular gut strike of seeing it made real against the winter sky. Lord Draveth of House Morthane had moved the moment Varen left the capital with his wolves. He had done it with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this exact sequence for years. The scout who rode out to meet them on the hill road confirmed what Orvin already knew. Lord Draveth had declared himself regent 3 nights ago. He had produced a sealed document, witnessed by 4 noble houses, claiming the Alpha King had descended into instability and was no longer capable of ruling. He had placed Maris on the throne as acting queen pending the king's formal removal. He had dismissed or imprisoned every counselor and guard who refused to accept the new order. And he had taken hostages, 31 of them. Servants and guards who had remained loyal and paid for it in chains. They were being held in the lower keep, the scout said, and Lord Draveth had made his position clear at dawn. If the king's forces approached the city walls, 1 hostage would be executed each hour until either the king surrendered himself or the supply of loyal servants ran out. "Willa," Soraya said. The scout looked at her. The senior attendant, iron-gray hair, stationed in the western corridor of the main hall. "Is she among the hostages?" The scout hesitated, then nodded. Soraya looked straight ahead at the black stag banner moving against the cold sky. Willa, who had watched her leave through a gap in a door with a grief on her face, like something she had been carrying for years. Who had said nothing and done nothing because there was nothing safe she could do. Who had chosen silence not out of cruelty, but out of the particular helplessness of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had no power to stop it. "We save them all," Soraya said. Varen looked down at her. "Soraya, you cannot enter that city. If Morthane realizes who you are?" "If Morthane wanted to use me as a bargaining piece, he would have sent his extraction team to take me alive, rather than ordering them to handle the matter cleanly." She met his eyes. "He wants me gone, not captured. I am safer in that city than hiding outside it." Varen was quiet for a moment. Something worked through his expression that she was beginning to recognize, the internal argument of a man who knew someone was right and wished they were not. He turned to address the wolves assembled behind them on the hillside road. The sight of them had already steadied something in Soraya's chest. Dozens of them, silver gray and battle-ready, their amber eyes moving between their king and the banner above the city walls, with the focused attention of animals that had been waiting 3 months for something to point themselves toward. House Morthane has done what traitors always do, Varen said. They have mistaken patience for weakness, and taken what was never theirs to take. His voice carried to every wolf on that hillside without being raised. Today, we take it back. The wolves answered with a sound that rolled down the hill toward the city like something geological. We take the outer walls first, he continued. The lower keep second. No unnecessary force, no civilian harm. Every Morthane soldier who surrenders walks away with his life. His eyes went to the black stag banner. Everyone who does not answer for their own choice. He looked at Soraya then. Something quiet and fierce in his expression. Stay with Orvin until the keep is clear. Please. She noted the please. She noted that he had learned, in the time since she left, that asking was worth more than instructing. Until the keep is clear, she agreed. Then I decide what comes next. He accepted that. He kissed her once, briefly and completely, and then shifted and led the charge down the hill. The outer walls lasted 40 minutes. Soraya watched from a ridge above the eastern gate with Orvin at her side, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade with the practiced readiness of a man who expected his position to stop being safe at some point and was prepared for that moment when it came. House Morthane's soldiers had numbers and fortified walls and the high ground of a city that had been held for 3 days. What they did not have was 3 months of accumulated fury, and a king whose wolf had been starved of its mate for so long that the animal was running almost entirely without the man's restraint. The first gate came down faster than the scouts had predicted. She could feel Varen through the bond as she watched it happen, a blazing inferno of contained purpose that scorched along the connection between them. Not the frenzied chaos she might have expected from an alpha who had been to the edge and back. Something colder and more precise. The fury of a man who had decided what needed to be done and was doing it with both hands and no uncertainty. The second gate fell before the first hour was out. By mid-morning, the outer walls had emptied of defenders faster than the Morthane commanders could reinforce them, their soldiers making the calculation that the terms being offered by the king's wolves, surrender and live, compared favorably to the alternative. Lord Draveth's great coalition was discovering that political ambition was considerably easier to maintain when the king was absent and difficult to sustain when he was standing at the bottom of your walls in wolf form. The lower keep held longer. Orvin received the report just past noon. Lord Draveth had retreated to the throne room with the 31 hostages and barred the doors from the inside. Maris was with him, along with 12 soldiers who had apparently decided that their fates were bound closely enough to the Morthane family that surrender was no longer a viable option. The ultimatum came through a herald at the postern gate, delivered in the flat, careful tone of a man who had been given the words and was not personally invested in them. Lord Draveth of House Morthane would release the hostages unharmed. In exchange, the Alpha King would enter the throne room alone and unarmed, and submit himself to arrest on the grounds of instability and dereliction. If this offer was refused, the hostages would be removed at a rate of 1 every 15 minutes, beginning with the oldest and least useful, until either the offer was accepted or the supply was exhausted. Varen's response arrived back through the same herald. 4 words: "We are coming in." The herald delivered this message and then walked very quickly in the opposite direction. Soraya was already moving toward the castle gates before Orvin finished reading the report to her. She found Varen at the outer doors of the throne room with Orvin and 4 of his wolves, all of them human-formed, all of them radiating the taut, contained tension of people who had been told to wait and were waiting at significant personal cost. "You were supposed to stay with Orvin," Varen said. "I was with Orvin," Soraya replied. "I simply also moved." He looked at her. She looked back. The argument that might have happened in a different version of their lives did not happen here, because he had learned something in the months apart about what she was capable of choosing, and she had learned something about what it meant to him to have her close, and both of those things were present in the 6 feet of corridor between them. She walked to him and placed her hand flat against his chest. "I need to go in," she said. "Soraya, he will not negotiate with you. You are what he is trying to defeat. Every minute you spend at this door is a minute one of those people inside is running out of." She kept her voice steady and her eyes on his. "But I am not the threat in this equation. I am the thing he has been trying to eliminate quietly, which means he has been afraid of what I represent. Afraid of what our child represents." She pressed her hand harder against his chest. "Let me use that. If he harms you, he will not harm me while I carry your heir and he still has ambitions." She paused. "And I am not who I was 3 months ago. I know that now. I think you know it too." Through the bond she felt him. The war between instinct and reason. The wolf screaming for her to stay behind him and the man understanding why she could not. She felt the moment when the man won and felt what it cost him and loved him more for the cost. "I will be on the other side of that door," he said. "The moment you need me, I will come through it." "I know." She looked up at him. "Varen, yes, I love you." She said it plainly without drama, the way she would have said it to him on an ordinary morning if they had been given ordinary mornings. "I loved you when I thought you had chosen someone else. I loved you through every day of exile and every sleepless night, and every morning I told myself not to think about you. That love does not expire. I need you to know that before I walk through this door." He was very still for a moment. Then he said, "You came all that way to give me good news." "I did." "Then let us make sure we get to the part where I actually receive it." He pressed his forehead to hers briefly, fiercely. "Come back to me." She turned to face the throne room doors and pushed them open and walked through. The room was larger than she had expected and worse than she had imagined. 31 hostages knelt in 3 rows before the raised dais, their hands bound behind them, the faces of people who had been afraid for long enough that fear had settled into something quieter and more enduring. A double line of Morthane soldiers stood behind them with swords drawn. On the throne that belonged to Varen sat Lord Draveth of House Morthane. He was a heavy-set man with close-cropped white hair and the patient, satisfied bearing of someone who had been planning a moment for so long that arriving in it felt like coming home. Beside the throne stood Maris, composed and cool, her copper hair dressed as if for a court occasion. "The missing piece arrives," Lord Draveth said, his voice rich with satisfaction. "We have been expecting you, in a manner of speaking." Soraya looked at the hostages. Her eyes found Willa in the 2nd row. The older woman's face was bruised along one cheekbone. Her eyes, when they found Soraya's, held the same ancient grief they had held in the doorway of the great hall on the night everything fell apart. The grief of someone who had watched the wrong thing happen and had been unable to stop it. "You should run," those eyes said now, as they had said then. Soraya looked away from Willa and addressed Lord Draveth. "Release them," she said. "All of them. In exchange, I will stay." The room did not quite react, but she felt the quality of its silence change. "You will stay regardless," Maris said coolly. "You are one woman, alone, unarmed. You have no leverage here." "I have something better than leverage," Soraya said. "I have the only thing in this room that cannot be replaced." She placed both hands against her stomach. "Your coup rests on the king's instability," she continued, addressing Lord Draveth directly. "It falls apart the moment he appears competent and bonded and in command of himself, which means everything you have built in 3 days dissolves the moment his true mate stands beside him." She paused. "Release them. Take me instead. You buy yourself time to negotiate. This is the best offer available to you, and you know it." Lord Draveth studied her with the eyes of a man weighing everything simultaneously. The calculation was visible on his face, the ledger of risk against gain. "Father," Maris said sharply, "patience." He raised one hand toward her without looking away from Soraya. Then, slowly, he nodded. Release them. The soldiers cut the hostages free. They rose in confused clusters, some weeping, some unable to stand without help. Willa moved toward Soraya as the guards pushed her back with the others, and Soraya met her eyes for one moment and gave the smallest shake of her head. Go. Please go. Willa went. As the last hostage cleared the room, rough hands closed around Soraya's arms from behind, and the baby, as if it had been waiting for this moment with the patience of someone who understood timing, woke up. The warmth moved through her like a tide coming in. Not the controlled, directed healing warmth she had spent her life carefully managing. This was broader and older, and far less interested in her preferences. She had felt something like it in the cottage when the wolf lunged, but that had been a flicker. This was the whole fire. Her body made a decision she had spent 3 months resisting. Pain split through her from her spine to her sternum, precise and total, and she heard one of the soldiers behind her take a sharp step back. What is this? Lord Dreveth was on his feet. The light was coming from her hands, then from her collarbone, from the mark that had burned every morning for 3 months without fading. Then from everywhere, a gold that was almost white, flooding out from her into the space of the throne room with no regard for the people who found it inconvenient. Soraya fell to her knees as the transformation took her. She had felt it begin in the cottage and known it for what it was. The change that happened to wolfkind when a claiming bond was sealed and accepted, and the blood responded to what the heart already knew. She had been fighting it for months, holding it back with sheer stubbornness, refusing to allow herself to become something she was not certain she could control. She stopped fighting. Every bone reformed. Every muscle rebuilt itself from the inside out. She heard voices around her, orders being shouted, soldiers falling back from the light. She heard Maris scream something at her father. She heard the throne room doors splinter. And then the change completed, and the pain stopped. And she stood up. Not on 2 legs. The Morthane soldiers who had not already run looked at the wolf that now occupied the space where the bound woman had been and received the information that was available to them and made their decisions accordingly. Swords hit the stone floor. Boots moved toward exits. Lord Draveth did not run. He drew the blade at his hip and looked at her with the burning, desperate expression of a man watching his entire life's work collide with something he had not accounted for, and he raised the weapon above his head. The black wolf that came through the ruined doors crossed the throne room in a single bound. Varen's jaws closed around Draveth's sword arm with a precision that was almost surgical, and the blade rang against the stone floor, and the Lord of House Morthane made a sound that the throne room held for a long moment before silence replaced it. Varen shifted. He stood between Soraya and Draveth, human again, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on any face before and understood immediately. She shifted. Standing before him, breathing hard, her hands still carrying faint traces of warmth. She looked at her own hands for a moment, at the evidence of what she was and had always been, and had spent so much energy hiding. Then she looked at Varen. You shifted, he said. I stopped arguing with myself, she replied. Something moved through his face that was too large and too various to name. Maris, in the corner of the room where she had retreated, still held herself with composure. The composure of a woman who had trained for every contingency except this one. When she finally moved, it was not toward them. It was toward the door. One of Varen's wolves stepped across the threshold and she stopped. Maris of House Morthane, Varen said, without turning to look at her. You are not going anywhere. The trials of House Morthane lasted 11 days. Lord Draveth had planned this for 6 years. The testimony established it with exhaustive thoroughness. The corrupted steward with access to the wine stores. The network of informants placed in outlying villages. The silver root compound refined over 2 years of testing until it could suppress a wolf's instincts completely without leaving traces. The political agreements made in private with 4 noble houses, purchased with promises of territory and position. The coup timed precisely for Varen's absence. 6 years. Every piece of it aimed at a single outcome. Lord Draveth showed no remorse. He sat straight-backed through 11 days of testimony and looked at the assembled packs with the bearing of a man who had made a calculated decision, lost, and considered himself still correct about the underlying logic. He was sentenced to exile beyond the eastern borders, stripped of his title and his house's rights, condemned to live beyond the reach of wolf-kind society for the remainder of his days. Maris left Arranmore 2 mornings after the verdict, stripped of her family name, permitted to go in peace with enough coin to build a life elsewhere. She did not look back. The 4 noble houses that had backed the coup made their formal submissions before the assembled packs and received judgments the packs decided, some generous and some less so. All of them permanent. On the morning after the final verdict, Varen found Soraya at the window of her old chamber in the eastern corridor. The same window she had stood at on the night she packed and left. "I keep coming back here," she said when he came to stand beside her. "I know," he said. "I have stood here too. The night you left, I came to this room and looked out at the bonfires for a long time. I made myself a promise standing here, that I would find you, that whatever the cost was, it was worth paying." "And was it?" she asked. He looked at her the way she had learned he looked at things he intended to keep. "Every coin of it," he said. They stood at the window until the light changed, and then he said, "There is something that needs to be completed. When you are ready. Not before." The bond on her collarbone had burned for 3 months, had guided him across the kingdom and refused to fade through exile and grief, and everything House Morthane had done to sever it. Real and whole and always both those things. Never formally sealed. She turned to face him. "I have been ready," she said, "since before I understood what ready meant." He tilted his head. The deliberate exposure of the throat, the offering of the most vulnerable place on a wolf's body to the one person they trusted with it completely. She stepped forward and pressed her lips to the curve of his throat where the pulse beat strongest, and she claimed him. The bond did not open. It erupted. Everything that had been building through 6 months of something without a proper name and 3 months of separation. Everything she had felt on the nights she had refused to believe in what she was feeling. All of it broke open between them at once like a room full of held breath finally released. She felt him in a way she had no previous framework for. Not just his presence, but the architecture of him. The night he had stood in front of her cottage in Calwick for 30 seconds before speaking, understanding in those 30 seconds that something was happening that he had no existing category for. The deliberate patience of 6 months building trust before allowing himself to want more. The horror of waking with no memory and finding her gone. She felt his terror on the hillside when the trees came down and he saw her standing in the cottage ruins with her hands glowing. His relief when the transformation completed and she stood before him whole. The specific quality of his pride, not the pride of ownership, but the pride of recognition. The feeling of watching someone reveal something true about themselves that they had carried hidden for so long, the hiding had become a kind of posture. She felt every night he had pushed through the bond while she slept in Calwick and told herself it was imagination. She felt how it had landed on his side, that reaching, the specific despair of calling out into a connection that responded but could not answer back clearly. She felt 2 months and 3 weeks and 4 days of that, and understood finally and completely what the counting had cost him. And she felt something she had not expected. The way he had looked at her in the throne room when she turned to face him after the shift completed. Standing in the body she had always had and had always hidden. His expression had been the expression of a man looking at someone he had always known and was only now, at last, seeing without obstruction. When she stepped back from him, they were both trembling. She tilted her head. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and leaned down, and his lips found the mark on her collarbone that had burned for 3 months without fading. He claimed her back. Precisely. Permanently. The bond sealed with a warmth that moved through her from collarbone to fingertips to the place where the child moved, and she felt the answering seal from his side, a completeness she had no words for and did not need words for. Through the castle walls and then through the city, the wolves of Arranmore began to howl. Not the howls of battle or warning, the deep, sustained howl of a pack that had felt something shift in the fabric of its world and was marking that shift in the only language available to it. "My king," Soraya said. "My queen," Varen answered. Orvin's voice came from the corridor. "I am aware this is a significant moment. I am also aware the Eastern Council has been waiting 40 minutes. I am simply providing both facts simultaneously." Soraya laughed. She had not laughed since before she left. The sound of it surprised her. Varen smiled at her. The real one, the unguarded one, the one she had believed was hers and now understood had always been hers. "The council can wait 5 more minutes," he called back. "Noted," Orvin said. "I will tell them 6. Spring came slowly to Arranmore, the way it comes to places that have been through hard winters. Tentative at first and then with increasing conviction. The crops recovered. The trade routes reopened. The wolves of the kingdom, who had felt the broken bond like a note held too long in a minor key, settled back into themselves as the completed bond radiated outward through the connections linking a pack to its alpha. On a morning in early spring, Soraya's labor began. 2 children. A boy born first, dark-haired from his first breath, who opened his eyes and assessed the world with an expression of profound skeptical consideration. He had his father's eyes and, when Soraya pressed her palm to his small chest, his mother's healing gift. A girl born second, quieter in her first moments and steadily less so. She had Soraya's coloring and her father's patience. She shifted for the first time at 11 days old, a brief, startled transition that lasted 4 seconds before she shifted back and looked around as if adding new information to an ongoing calculation. Her wolf, when it came fully, was the silver white of winter birch. Soraya lay with both children settled against her and Varen beside her, and thought about everything it had taken to arrive at this particular morning. The 3 days riding through cold. The door she had pressed her face to. The months in Calwick learning to be someone else. The letter in the frost. The cottage coming apart around her, and the light in her palms, and the moment she stopped fighting what she was. She thought about a bond that had burned for 3 months and refused to fade. "What are you thinking about?" Varen asked. He was watching her with the softness he reserved for moments he intended to remember. "Everything it took," she said. He understood, as he usually did. "All of it," he said. "Worth paying." Outside, the wolves of Arranmore called to each other across the city in the spring air, the sounds of a pack that had found its center again and knew it. She had come to surprise him with love, and walked instead into the worst moment of her life. She had stood in a doorway with the best news she had ever carried, and watched it become irrelevant in a single sentence spoken by a man who did not know what he was saying. She had packed her few things and walked out through a servant's gate and built a life from nothing in the village where she was born, and delivered babies and set bones and whispered to her child in the dark and refused, even when refusing was the harder thing, to stop being who she was. And the bond had done what true bonds do. It had burned through everything done to silence it. It had guided him across the kingdom by feel alone. It had waited, with the patience of something that already knew how the story ended, for all the pieces to find their way back to each other. Some things are stronger than strategy, stronger than schemes built in the dark over years, stronger than the most carefully prepared silence. The bond had known, even when they had not, and it had never, through any of it, behaved like something finished, because it was not finished. It was only beginning. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.